Hello everyone and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 3.18 and this is our effects categorization part 1 video. So what I find with people is when they first get started and they really have no idea what any of the effects do at all, they just kind of go in, open this up and grab whatever sounds most interesting to them. So if I was to open this up and see all these options, I'd probably go with the resonator bank or with the frequency shifter, okay? They're like the two longest things and they seem like the most complicated. Now, there's nothing wrong with kind of learning that way, and honestly, that's probably the way I learned, just because I opened up and tried every single one and started to make those connections. But what you really want to do is go back to the fundamentals. And you remember when we talked about our fundamentals of sound, we had some of those videos on frequency, on dynamics, or on amplitude. We had something on timbre. And when we've been talking about making our music on our timeline, we've basically said that any music is just sound over time. So let's pull out 3 of those categories right now. The first one is going to be time, right? Time is very imperative to any sound. Every sound has a start and some kind of perceivable end, or maybe it never ends. It's just a constant hum in the background, right? So it sustains for your entire life. Obviously, that's probably not realistic, but you never know. We also have frequency. Okay, so we have our span device and we can see how things fill up that frequency spectrum from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Obviously, the frequency spectrum is wider than that, but for human hearing, that's pretty much what we can perceive, or something around that range. And then last but not least, we're going to have amplitude, so how loud or how soft something is. And remember when we talked about the amplitude envelope, that's going to come back when we start sorting out these effects. So we had the attack stage, we had the release stage, the attack stage being how long it took for a sound to reach its peak value. So if we look at this snare here, the attack is almost instantaneous, right? It's from this point up until here. And then the release or the decay is from this till the very end of the sample, which is all the way at this point here. Okay, so that's how we're going to be sorting out our effects. And you're going to find that with each and every effect you pull up, it can pretty much fall into one of those 3 categories. Don't get me wrong, a lot of these effects you can make a case for in different categories, but you're going to see how logical this really is when we start to go through. And what we're going to do is we're going to look for similar parameters that we can mess with or that we can change in all of these effects. And when we have parameters that are overlapping, so for example, if you see something that says like delay time or time in milliseconds or time in beats, you know that that's going to fall into our time category. So I've gone ahead here, and I would encourage you guys to do the exact same thing. I have a Word document, and I've just called it Bitwig Effects Categories and Placement. In this video, we're going to go through 3 very obvious examples, one that falls into each category. And then the next video, we're going to actually go through and take a listen to all the rest of the effects and start placing them. So have a document like this and use it. And after this video, maybe try and mess around for 30 minutes or an hour and see if you can place everything. And we'll see if we come up with the exact same thing. So I have my 3 categories: time, duration, amplitude, volume, level, and frequency. And in quotes, I just put the spectral content. So we'll load up our span as well to help us out here. And so for time and duration, I put the delay 1. For amplitude, the most obvious and easy one of all, the tool device. And for frequency, I just went ahead and selected the filter. So what I'm going to do here is also kind of organize my effects by creating different effects layers. Okay, and with each of those effects layers, I'm going to set new layers for any effect that's going to fall into the category. So we have 3 categories. I'm going to make 3 duplications of this particular audio track that has my samples on it. Maybe first thing I'll do is be smart and go into my browser and put the span on here. So that way I don't have to keep reduplicating that as well. And I'm going to just take my audio track, Command D, duplicate out 4 copies of it. The first one I'm going to leave unaffected, so I'm going to call this one raw, and I'm not going to place any samples on this one, or excuse me, I'm not going to place any effects or any devices on this channel at any point. This one I'll go ahead and rename for our time. Maybe I'll put /duration. We'll name this one Amplitude. And then we'll rename this one to be Frequency. And I'm just going to go ahead and color these things different just because I'm anal about that for whatever reason. Interesting how it actually changes the color of the sample as well. I wasn't aware of that. I'm not sure if that's supposed to happen, but it does. Okay, so let's go ahead and just sort of look at these effects, look at the parameters that we've already labeled in our Word document here, and then that will wrap up this particular video. And like I said, in the next video, we're going to actually go through every single one of the effects that comes bundled inside of Bitwig Studio and try to sort those out. So time duration, what do I have? Delay 1. Let's load that up. Obviously something called delay seems like it's going to take our sound and it's going to play it back as an echo of some kind. All right, so let's just see what controls we have here. This first control here seems to be setting the delay time in an actual beat division. So this says in 16 note steps. So if we go 4/16, that is going to be a quarter note. So you're just going to take any of these and divide it by 16. So 1/16, 2/16 being an eighth note, etc., etc., etc. You guys can do the math there. Now we have this other parameter at the top here, this little note, which says when to set it in steps as rhythmic durations or in a time, which is going to be in milliseconds. So you can see if I click that, it's going to gray out my selector here to select my note subdivisions, and instead it's going to be working in milliseconds, which I can change here however I want to change it. It goes up all the way to 5 seconds and as low as 10 milliseconds, which is actually going to be a different effect that we'll look at a little bit later. We also have a feedback parameter, and for right now I'm just going to put that to 0. Our mix parameter, I'd like to put that at 50%. And now here's where things get interesting because we have these high pass and low pass filters. So this is going to actually take away some of the frequency content of our delayed signal. But for right now, I'm going to take this high and I'm just going to put it all the way at the top. I'm going to take this low and I'm going to bring it all the way to the bottom, which means we should just get a straight pure echo. So I'm going to open up my span here, put it off to the side, and let's take a quick listen at this as I mess around with a couple of these parameters. Let's take it out of millisecond mode or out of free mode and go back into rhythmic sync. And this is going to sync with whatever BPM we have up here. So right now it's 60 BPM, so that's how it's going to judge the duration of these, whatever we're using, whether it's a quarter note, a half note, whatever. So let's play this back and see what we get. Right now I'm going to actually turn this off of loop. Well, we can leave the loop on, can't we? So we can look at this inside the span. And you can hear that the second one is a little bit quieter, and that's because I've turned the mix down just a little bit. If I bring this back to 50%, which again, if you need to, you can always command click. We can speed this up if we want. And then we also have a feedback control as well if we wanted to have more repeats of the particular sample. So let's turn that up. You can hear it here. Okay, so that one was pretty easy to set. What I want to do though is I want to set this inside of a FX layer so we can just at the end save our various FX layers and be able to recall them at any time in a later project. So I'm just going to open this up and I'm going to select FX layer at the front. I'm going to grab my delay and I'm just going to drag and drop it in just like that. This one says delay. I'm going to just call it what it already said, delay 1, which is all I want to do. So now if I want to bring another effect in here, it's really easy for me to just add a totally new chain here so we can actually get all of our various time duration based effects all inside of this effects layer. Amplitude is going to be pretty straightforward. I don't even know if I need to pull up the span for this, but I'll do it anyway. Again, I'm going to grab an effects layer. I'm going to open this up. I'm going to select the tool device, and the tool device gives us a few different things we're going to mess around with. We'll talk about these in more depth a little bit later, but for now, we'll just focus on amplitude, which is pretty straightforward. So if we're playing back our drum loop here, get the span going. Okay, I can turn it up. Or I can pull it way down. All right, that's about as straightforward as it's going to get. Like I mentioned before, as we go through our other effects, we're going to be able to just add separate chains down here. All right, so we'll be doing our processing in parallel. Last but not least, we have frequency. And as I mentioned before, we're going to use our filter. So the frequency-based effects are all making changes to the actual frequency content. So if I have my chord stab playing as an example, this is going to be a little tricky because there's not that much going on here. But I can open this up and you're going to start to see. And I pull it back. So we can see just how much of that frequency content we've taken away using the filter. And you're wondering and saying, well, isn't this actually like an amplitude change? In a way it is, but we have a control if we want. I'm going to set this to 0 actually. Let me turn this off real quick. Turn it back on. And actually, our amplitude is quite similar, mainly because of this resonance control, which we'll talk about more a little bit later. But for now, I want us to focus on just the fact that we're losing content, okay? And anytime we're losing or gaining content to the frequency spectrum, we're gonna drop that effect inside of frequency. Anytime we're boosting or cutting the entire spectrum at any given point, that's when we're going to use amplitude. And anytime we're taking our signal and we're repeating it in any kind of way, even if it's just a fraction of a second later, we're going to be dropping those effects into our time and duration category. So just to be consistent, I'm going to go ahead and add an effects layer here and just drop our filter right in there. So again, this wasn't a video specifically about all of the parameters inside of each of these effects. We're going to do that after we go ahead and sort everything. But for now, I hope you're seeing and understanding that we can very easily take any effect and we can find a place for it inside of the 3 categories that we've created. Thank you guys so much for watching, and you'll hear from me again in the next lesson.